Here's your host, Bryan.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the show. During today's show, we will discuss mobility strategies in the federal government. With me on the show today are Rick Walsh, the mobility lead at the U.S. Army, Adrian Gardner, the CIO at FEMA at Homeland Security, Rick Holgate, the Assistant Director, CIO, Office of Science and Technology at ATF, David O'Barry, Worldwide Technical Strategist, Office of the CTO at Intel Security, Joe Portale, the Chief Technologist, Mobility Solutions at Lockheed Martin, and Bryan, Coapstick, the Director of Mobile Innovation, HP Enterprise Services, U.S. Public Sector. Let's talk about mobility. There's new products on the market. It seems like every single day we've got something new happening. Rick, I know you've been involved in playing a lead role over at the U.S. Army for quite some time in this. Tell us a little bit about some of the progress you're seeing. Rick Walsh, U.S. Army.
Yeah, so far to date, we've been very active in what we want to do in mobile. Some of our best candidates for progress would be the United States Recruiting Command, Corps of Engineers, and possibly West Point. The United States Recruiting Command is actually looking at operating with mobile devices to interface with young men and young women who are candidates for the Army, coming in, working with them in their environment. So that is in social media, Snapchat, Facebook, those kinds of things. So we have a process that a sergeant first class recruiter operates from his vehicle in the car, working with young men and young women over the public environment, the public internet. So the question might be, how do we do that and how we secure that? Well, most of the work is done, as I said, in the public environment, so we're not looking at any PII or anything that we need to secure in the initial phases, and we're working in their environment, so it's actually very exciting.
Terrific. Yeah, we'll drill down on some of these things as we work along. Adrian Gardner over FEMA. Adrian, I guess when I think of FEMA, I think mobility is a core critical need, because I guess when you think of FEMA operations, you think of the field, things going on in the field.
Yeah,
Tell us about some progress you're seeing.
You're absolutely right. One of the key things is it always has been sort of been in the ethos in the field, but now we're really bringing that to headquarters and actually to the regional headquarters offices as well. So working in partnership with the Chief Administrative Officer, Bob Waltermeyer, the CIO and Chief Security Officer, actually have a mobility strategy that includes sort of downsizing our footprint in headquarters. So we basically have established a sort of a standard, a space standard across the region. In the past 18 months or so, we've downsized from basically 7 buildings to eventually by April 2.
Wow.
And we've actually sort of put in place a standard of telework for approximately 60% of the staff on a daily basis.
Man, that's fantastic.
So we're downsizing to basically 2 locations at 400 and 500 C Street. We're now taking that out to the field as well. So one of the keys is ensuring that everybody has the technology required in order to be mobile. So the other thing is flattening the space, going to a hoteling framework. And so we've done all that, and we started with the administrator's office.
Wow.
So we started with our most important, or one of our most important clients.
Sure.
But this is really about how do we better serve the survivors, and so really making everybody mobile, getting used to mobility, and making that just part of the way that we do work.
Wow, terrific! That's a great model, and clearly it's the model of the future. I think. I mean, you're just getting out in front of the curve, and I know your administrator. He's a big advocate of the technology too. I had him for some of the FC events I do, and I remember he was showing me on his mobile devices all the neat things he was doing. I'm thinking that's pretty cool to have that as a lead. Bryan Coapstick. Tell us a little bit about HP Enterprise Services and how you guys are making progress supporting your customers with mobility.
So I'll just even tack on to Rick's comment about the Army. I mean, the recruiting was a great example of how they digitally transformed the interaction. Clearly we're trying to address a very different audience than historically, and using, new media and different techniques to engage, interact, and make that recruit successful as they ship out. I think that's a great example. Some other ones, what the VA is doing with the Connected Health program, that's clearly a trend-setting one, fundamentally changing how the veterans interact with the agency, reducing the friction barrier in delivering service to those people that served our country. There's clearly, some of the things coming out of 18F that are clearly interesting. I mean, most people have wrapped up the Agile BPA, as well as, we've seen some interesting news out of the Navy just recently. The article last week that came out in FedScoop of how they're, really trying to move at cloud speed, which is necessary for these, what I would say, newer age mobile technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had that discussion too in many a radio show. Decision making when time is approaching zero for the amount of time to make those decisions. Rick Holgate over at ATF. Rick, I guess over the years, your name's kind of been associated with leadership in the mobility area. I know you did a lot with ACT and IACT and a lot of the other things. So I guess, you've been in the middle of it now for quite some time. Where are you seeing progress being made?
Yeah, I'd say we see progress across the entire federal government. So as you indicated, ATF was a relatively early adopter of consumer mobile technologies. But you recall 3 years ago, OMB actually issued a digital government strategy to encourage more rapid adoption of mobility. And in the succeeding 3 years, we made a tremendous amount of progress across the federal government. You look at GSA's enterprise mobility vehicles that now 86% of the federal agencies are using to achieve greater economy as they buy mobile services. So that's great progress there. We have a mobile technology tiger team that's designed to lower the barriers of adoption of mobile technology by giving them a roadmap and a security footprint that they need to follow to more readily adopt mobile technology. And if you look just across the law enforcement agencies in the federal government, we've all essentially adopted mobile technologies. ATF, ICE, Secret Service, FBI. We're pretty much going to have 100% permeation of mobility throughout the entire law enforcement community here by the end of the year. And even within DOJ, we've gotten comfortable with mobility to the extent that we're now adopting common platforms, common services across DOJ that make it more efficient and more interoperable in the mobility space. So we've got a common mobile device management solution. We've got common mobility policies across DOJ. So all of that's growing maturity in the way we approach mobility. And if you look at ACT-IAC's held 2 mobile application fairs the last couple of years. That's signs of the increasing innovation and inspiration that exists out there to meet emerging needs in the mobile space, whether it's mobile healthcare, mobile support to veterans, just improving the penetration of federal applications into the mobile space in a way that makes our service delivery more intimate to those citizens that we serve.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, it's and your law enforcement examples are right on too. It's pretty self-evident that law enforcement needs mobile products as they're out in the field doing their job. And I think as we see the trend with the next generation of workforce coming along who live on mobile devices, I mean, I think for the next generation workforce, it's just going to be taken for granted that we're going to have all the tools we need at our fingertips. David O'Barry, let's talk about Intel security and how Intel plays into supporting some of these wireless programs across government.
So I think, and when you think about everything and what Adrian said, Rick said, I mean, everything's mobile. I mean, that's really where we're going, right? And so I was state government for 19 years. I was a CIO for the last 14 before I came to for probation in South Carolina before I came to Intel, or McAfee at that point, now Intel Security Group. Right. And what we realized is that everything had to be mobile because the enablement of the tip of the spear. Basically, how many secure minutes can you give an end user a day? How do you enable that? And so it was really difficult when you think about it, because oftentimes, the minute you got into that situation, it was no, we don't know, you can't do this because of this. And so what we kind of learned and what Intel's pushing is it's not no, it's so here's what I understand you want to do. We know this is where it's going. So if you begin to secure everything, like Rick was saying about everything ending up being mobile, you got 100% permeation, then everything becomes that baseline at that point in time. You have to standardize where you can, and that's the interesting aspect about moving forward in a standards perspective, but there is going to be that part where you can actually, whether it be a mobile phone or it's a notebook, everything ends up being mobile, even data centers are mobile. And Adrian sees that I'm sure, on quite often. The data center has to be mobile. When you think about things that are really enablers for that going forward and stuff we've been working with, FirstNet, huge enabler going forward at some point in time for those types of things. Next generation 911, all of these things are kind of coming together, and they're not reinventing the wheel when they're doing it. And I think that's the key. Yeah. So from our perspective is that how do we go through and look at everything as an Internet of Things? Right. Everything is mobile. Everything is dispersed. Everything is, we have to eat the dirt at the edge, to make the ecosystem stronger.
Right. We're actually adding Internet of Things as a subject for a future show because it's becoming such a hot topic. People are interested in. I was even saw demos the other day of drones carrying around temporary LTE towers, which you can move networks all over the place where you didn't have communications before and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and when you think about it, Adrian, the way they've done this is amazing because now they can actually pick up and put down, wherever they need to. And so once you consume that, and it becomes part of that DNA, as you know in the ATF and what you guys are doing, then all of a sudden now you become so much more agile.
Right.
So the things that used to be impediments to what Adrian and Rick are doing, now people just assume it, right? And now as they iterate on that, they become much more progressive in how they think about things.
Right.
They're no longer thinking, I need to get to a desktop or I need to get to somewhere. Even, as you just change the culture.
Right.
Once you change
And
that culture, it's important.
With the 500 megahertz that's being looked at by NTIA and dividing that up to help with the broadband, to help get more broadband out there, the capacity out there is all going to get better and better and better. Joe Portale over at Lockheed Martin, how you guys playing in supporting your customer base in mobility solutions?
Well, thanks. I agree with Rick's comments. I think there's progress being made really across the federal government. What we like that we're seeing and we're trying to support is how the convergence of technologies is really affecting mobile. So how the data analytics solutions that companies are working on, as we are, and cloud and cyber and social media, how we can really deliver to the mobile endpoint what matters to them at their point of use. So it's really how all those technologies converge to deliver a whole new set of use cases, support a whole new set of missions, and make sure that these are not phones just to read email anymore. These are phones to actually conduct missions, whether you're with the FDA, EPA, FEMA, if you're a warfighter in the field. We want to make sure that all those folks are getting the information they need to accomplish their missions, not just have a device to read their mail.
Absolutely, absolutely. David, you had a comment on that?
I think the standardization of that type of information interchange is so important. So what we're seeing with like threat streams and being able to standards transfer information from DHS amongst all the different federal government, DoD, this type of standard interchange, like Intel Security Group, we have something called DXL, which is the data exchange layer, to be able to actually exchange this data in real time. That's very important to being able to raise the profile, to know where those risks are, so you don't have to say no or get really paranoid about that situation. Again, it's not one size fits all right there.
Right.
So I think we have to get out of the mindset of freezing up the minute people says, the minute that mobile gets out of there. And there's some agencies that are doing it right, and some need to be pulled along with
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk about a specific program. Adrian, how about over FEMA? If I asked you to point at a specific program that you think is really making a difference and you're proud of there, what comes to mind?
Yeah, again, it would be our workplace transformation project. But then the other piece of that I think the gentlemen are talking about is one of the challenges that we have is looking at interoperability across our cross-domain and our partners, right? We deal with the whole community at FEMA. It's not just a federal entity. We go to state, local, tribal, and territorial.
Sure.
So as we look at these platforms, the issue of interoperability is one that we always have to discuss. So it's really important for across the board that we establish a standard that everybody can work towards. Even if we're looking at FirstNet, that's one of the the challenges and opportunities that's out there is how do we get the communities to a standard platform, standard approach for delivering those services. Right. And then the other piece is really pushing the data, right?
Sure.
We really need real-time data in order to support decision making. And so one of the challenges is how do you now pass that data from one domain to the next. In other words, going from a federal entity into state, local, tribal, and territorial, doing that securely. Right. And then also, there's going to be a lot of information that, you have to put confidence levels around.
Sure.
You may really get a 30% confidence level on, 2 hours into the disaster. Right. But then as the information becomes more mature, you're then passing that up and making hopefully better decisions on that. But recognizing that you put confidence levels around it, and then how do your mobile platforms facilitate that?
Yeah,
iterative loops are incredibly important that Adrian's talking about.
Yeah. Rick Holgate, if I asked you to point to a specific program you think is really making a difference, one that you would hold up as something that you're proud of and making a lot of good progress, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I have to give credit to our sometime rivals in the FBI for what they've done with mobility, and particularly a guy named Dave Rubin who leads their mobility efforts, and he's done tremendous things the last couple of years in terms of getting the FBI, which is traditionally a fairly cautious agency in terms of adopting commercial technology.
You think of them that way?
Yeah, they're extremely comfortable with mobile technology. They've got commercial mobile phones in the hands of 35,000 users. They've developed a management technique for those devices that they're comfortable with, which is require a lot of work on their end just to get comfortable with the level of insight and management they have of the devices. They've also extended the mobility mindset to the classified side, which is also incredibly exciting. So, they do almost all their work on the FBI net, which is a secret level network, which doesn't lend itself to mobility at all. They're looking at using virtualization, other techniques to allow them to take a laptop into the field to enter information into their case management system in the field. So that's incredibly exciting too. And the other thing that Dave has done is encouraging innovation in the environment too. So he's created an internal culture of application development where where individuals throughout the FBI can nominate an application use case that they've identified, and Dave will enable them to develop it on their own and provide it to the FBI. So it's an incredible incubation of innovation in FBI as well. And then the last thing I'd point out there is that Dave's also instituted a mobile application approval process for consumer applications that allows them to make risk-conscious decisions about whether they adopt and use a mobile application from a consumer side. So they can make a decision not on a permissive basis, but on an informed basis of, does it make sense for us to allow our users to have this application or not? So
Very cool. You know, there's, and the thing about too is industry knows this stuff. They know where the mobility's going. And I'm seeing a lot of the product companies coming out, working with NSA to get, certifications to use mobile devices in classified environments. Seeing devices where when you're using your business applications, your serendipity stuff doesn't work. And if you go to a serendipity app, the business stuff shuts off. All kinds of neat stuff going on in order to enable some of those kind of things to take place in the future. Rick Walsh, give me a specific program you think is really cool.
Really cool for what we're doing right now, and along with all the guys. One I want to give FEMA credit. The Corps of Engineers, we do a lot of work from the Corps of Engineers in terms of national disaster and recovery and supporting the people in the United States when something happens. We talk about coalition partners. FEMA is, for the Corps of Engineers, a coalition partner. Mm-hmm. Not like you would think in terms of we go overseas, we go over there, but coalition partner for the Corps of Engineers would be FEMA, Red Cross, National Guard Bureau. We have to stand up an environment that allows those people, those organizations, to work in a cohesive, common operating environment to do their jobs quickly and efficiently so that the people that are affected by these hurricanes and floods and such that you've all heard about are actually supported rather quickly. The process and some of the things that we've done, one that I know Adrian's aware of is Blue Roof. In a hurricane situation, a family or a town can have roofs torn off the building. Well, every one of us has gone into Home Depot and bought a tarpaulin. Well, the Blue Roof process is the Corps of Engineers with the coalition partners goes out and evaluates those homes that have been destroyed or affected, and then calls a team to go to the Home Depot to buy the roofs to put those on those people's house right away. Process used to take days. It now takes hours. Wow. And that's through the sharing of information, the sharing of engineers, and sharing of the work that's done. So now I come to your house, I see that you're the owner of the home, you sign a piece of paper, it's done, an order's automatically generated, a team is already at the Home Depot picking the stuff up, another team is on the way to your house to put it on. So I've got people repairing or supporting those homeowners' homes in hours versus days it used to take to go through the same process. So that's something that we're very, very proud of.
Yeah,
and it is a coalition effort.
And that is an excellent story. That's, we always like, it brings it home as to the fact that, we're talking mobility, but we're also talking now about doing things for people, potentially saving lives, and making the life of families through crisis situations be a lot less severe. I want to hear from our industry partners on the same subject, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rick Walsh from the U.S. Army, Adrian Gardner from FEMA, Rick Holgate from ATF, David O'Barry from Intel Security, Joe Portale from Lockheed Martin, and Bryan Coapstick from HP Enterprise Services. We're talking about mobility in government and programs and how well they're going. We've been talking about progress, and I've asked the government folks here to point to a program. Let me ask industry. I'll start with Joe Portale. Joe, if I asked you to point out a specific program that you think's doing some pretty cool things in helping in this area, what would you say?
Well, I think the focus in the healthcare space has been fantastic. I think it was mentioned earlier, and one in particular program we've supported and customer is the Coast Guard. Coast Guard is doing a lot of work in the mobile space, especially in their medical clinics. Mm-hmm. So they are able to access EMR from their tablets as they move through clinics, do it securely, be able to diagnose and treat patients more effectively through using the tablets. And they've viewed as a huge success, and we're very proud of it.
Yeah, very good. Good example there, too. It's just comical to go back over the years. My personal doctor, when they first went wireless in the office, he hated it. Now he actually loves it.
Yep.
You know, it's just interesting watching that culture change. Bryan Coapstick, what do you think if I asked you to point out a specific program that you think's making a difference?
Well, I'll just tack on to even some of the ones that people have already. I think the workplace example that Adrian gave was great because, whether it's putting the LTE on drones, you're enabling a workplace flexibility and agility that we haven't seen before, and you're fundamentally improving the customer experience and the employee experience in some of the most hostile and tough situations. I think, a lot of the success stories really come when, adding a software to a broken process doesn't make you digital, right? The hard part is reimagining the process. Writing the software is relatively easy, and especially, because of the policy mandates, things like that. We had an example that we actually, prototyped around real-time health systems to show the spread of epidemic diseases and simulate that on the floor. But I think, to his point earlier, I think, health is clearly one, but that interconnection with people is fundamentally what's going to give the successful programs, whether it's delivery of social services. We have countless examples, even to simple things like sharing content across devices. Okay, now I'm not only sharing within my organization, I have an easy mechanism. We do it right now with our Helium Mobility platform. We're sharing across different counties, different federal agencies, and that fundamentally changes the employee experience as well as speeds the information flow through the organizations.
Excellent. David O'Barry, if I asked you to name a specific program that you think's making a difference.
So first of all, I'll say that I think everyone, and Adrian and Rick talk about this, everyone ends up, the best information comes from the edge. Okay, so enablement of those folks is incredibly important. So what they've said the entire time, that's where the operators are, that's where the security has to be, that's where, enablement of that. So to say that, I also say that everyone is also a digital citizen. So the United States has people that are employees of Intel Security, and I'm a consumer of, at Walmart or wherever but I'm always a digital citizen of the United States. So, on the consumer side for us, there is free mobile stuff out there that actually can secure devices. There are tons of things that are out there that can help them. From the enterprise side, we also have that capability. But what I think going forward, a program that's very interesting for us is like FirstNet. This type of enablement, of baseband security and making sure that not only Next Generation 911 and FirstNet are out there and secure, but that they are actually all the way out to the edge where they need to be, so that when FEMA is dealing with a situation, they don't have to worry about radio interoperability and things where they can set up things, mobile command posts on the fly. That way you don't have to worry about getting in the way, because oftentimes security has gotten in the way of actual, getting to those people.
Absolutely, and I think security it remains a challenge, but it's in my mind, it is a challenge. It's not a constraint, and we can beat a challenge.
But if we even take Halverson's comment from last week, good enough security, I think, was the quote. Everybody was looking for a perfect solution, but I think it was, and Rick will correct me where I'm wrong. It was the FCA. Yeah. He talks about good enough security because in reality, is there more of a threat of the information not flowing than waiting for a perfect solution?
Very good point.
I think that most of the time what happens is that we talk about security, and so it's we have CIA. Everybody's always had the CIA triangle, right? But they always kind of get stuck on confidentiality. Right. Oftentimes they don't realize that for FEMA and for ATF at times availability, and integrity of the data actually will trump. And same thing on the healthcare side as well.
If we get off on security, we can talk for 5 more hours here, because we can go all kinds of directions. But it is out there, and we do programs just on that subject.
It can't be an impediment.
It can't be done in a few minutes. Rick Holgate, how about some lessons learned as you go through this process? What are some things that you're encountering, maybe that you'd pass on to your colleagues around town that would help them in terms of maybe shortcutting something or doing something a little quicker?
Well, and so not to go back to the mobile security theme, but I'd say that's one big lesson learned is to become more adaptive and agile in the security space.
Sure.
Because the nature of mobility changes not on a decade basis like we've gotten used to with desktops and that sort of thing. It changes on an annual basis from an operating system perspective, and it changes on a daily basis from an application perspective. So having a traditional security mindset of managing the environment as a static proposition isn't relevant anymore. We need to be much more agile in terms of, and I alluded to the FBI model, they take real-time threat assessments of applications and use that to make informed decisions about applications, and that changes on a daily basis. As applications are updated, as new threat information becomes relevant, they can make a real-time decision. So having that mindset of security constantly evolving and the posture of relative security constantly evolving is also critical. And in our case at ATF, the other challenge we've had is translating legacy processes to the mobile environment. So we've had 43 years of paper-based processes that we have to overcome. We have to change the mindset of how we do inspections of our industry partners, how we conduct criminal investigations, just to get them to think differently about how we solve a problem, how we give them tools in the field to meet a need without using a frame of reference of something that's paper-based or spreadsheet-based or very desktop-oriented. So that's been a struggle, is just to change that fundamental mindset.
Excellent point. Rick Walsh, what do you think is some of the lessons you're learning along the way here? You've been doing this for the Army for quite some time now, so I'm sure you've encountered quite a few interesting things along the way.
Well, what I would say where the Army's really focused today is what we're trying to do and trying to achieve what I'm going to call critical mass or common acceptance of mobility is moving towards today. I want to buy what I want to do. I want to look at the commercial market, and there's 5 million applications between Android and Apple right now. So there's probably a good chance that one of those apps are going to do something that I want to do within the Army. So my first move today is buy it. I'm trying to buy acceptance of the technology, acceptance of the tools, getting past voice, counter, contacts, and email. Okay, secondarily, I want to talk about how do I break. So when I say break, I'm saying existing legacy applications, how do I break them from the traditional infrastructure and make them mobile? So our philosophy is buy it today, break it, and lastly, I'm looking at building it, because you have to go through the first two steps before I want you to build something. That's today. 5 years from now, I want to flip that scenario. I want to build it first. So I want to go mobile first, build it. Not even 5 years, maybe 2 years, build it. So I want you to take, how has mobile changed the workspace? How has mobile made my life different? That's where the real benefits are going to happen. And that's kind of, and I go back, and I say this a lot, I go back to the Corps of Engineers. They're actually doing stuff today because of mobile that they didn't do 5 years ago. They're working, the partnerships that we have because of mobile at the Corps of Engineers did not exist. Okay, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, because it wasn't able. Now they're doing stuff today. So that's the kind of stuff. Take advantage of mobile, build something, let it change your business processes and adapt it to the way you do your job. But first off, to get buy-in, because you need money, you got to have corporations, you got to have the CFOs give you money to do your job. Buy those easy wins. Go get that word processing, get electronic signatures, get all that done easily. Once you get that, then you can buy in, then you can get the money to move forward to do your build.
Very good. Adrian, what do you think? Some of the lessons learned along the way here that you've encountered.
Yeah, so just as Rick mentioned, you got to have a mobile-first attitude. I mean, and that's transformational from the standpoint of the way that we've designed and developed and deployed systems in the past, right? FEMA is in a place right now where we're staging ourselves for a transformation, right? As we do that, we have to think about mobility first. And then what accompanies that is in data first, because as we also want the data to follow and be agile enough to take full advantage of that mobility framework. Sure. So one of the things that I would say is that folks have to sort of build mobility into the architecture on the front end. You need to have almost a mobility expert in the initiation phase of the development of a system. And the other part is begin to wrap our older systems into web services so that you can actually have access to them more agile as well. You know, most of the folks that we serve, you know, they either work with large insurance companies or large banking institutions, and they have clear mobile capability in the power of their hands on a daily basis at home. we need to sort of architect our systems and capabilities in the same way when in the workplace. And so this whole notion of how do we make mobility almost a design criterion on the very front end of the process is extremely important, which is not what most people think. They just kind of go out and say, let's build a system, right? And we do encounter that every day, but now we're saying, as you build it, you must think about mobile.
Yeah, be interesting when the desktop computer that's wired no longer exists in the office. And when will that day?
Or the laptop.
Or the laptop.
Or the laptop. That's well said.
When you think about hyper decentralization, we're really only bound on a phone by input and output.
Right.
How do I look at it, okay, and how do I get data into it, right? So if you think about the Internet of Things, when you get rid of that, you can speak to it, you can see it another way. What does that device become? It becomes very decentralized.
I'm leaving here today, and I'm going to a tablet and getting rid of my computer. That's wired at home. Any other lessons learned, David? While you're talking there, got a lesson learned for us? Do you want to put on the table?
I think what they're saying, and it makes so much sense, and we've been saying this for some time, that basically an agile organization requires an agile mind. Okay, these iterative loops, in the military has done them very well for some time. They're called OODA loops or Boyd's loops. So these iterations of being able to reorient on the fly are true enablers of these command decisions. And when I say command decisions, remember that every operator, every tip of the spear person is out there making command decisions pretty constantly. Right. And that goes for whether or not you're an enterprise or whatever. So that information being in their hands as in a timely manner as possible is incredibly important. Right. And so I think that when you think about this going forward, we're all part of one ecosystem here. And you were talking about mobility first, and I think that just becomes a thread that just permeates your entire digital life. Right. I mean, think about it. Let's frame this up real quick. iPad came out in 2010 or 11. I think it was actually 11, believe it or not. My son was right on this. I think it was 11. So, but even if it was 10, how long ago was that? How long ago does that feel?
Right.
I mean, and remember, we stuck with Windows 95 on the desktop for many more years than what, some people still have it.
Sure. Some people with Windows XP in the desktop now that are scrambling around figuring out how to get it off the desktop.
And when you think about it, I was in a convenience store the other day doing something, and there was a guy, he had to be 80 if it was a day, and he was like, I just need to upgrade, to the next lollipop, basically the Android operating system. I was like, and I was thinking, man, my grandmother and grandfather are upgrading their Android devices.
There you go.
This is that digital citizenry. This
Absolutely.
is enablement
Back to my
of that.
point of we're living in a new dimension now.
Yes, sir.
Where decision making is approaching zero. Adrian, you have a comment on it?
Yeah, you mentioned Boyd, and one of the things that the FEMA administrator is really pushing is sort of this survivor centricity, or really survivor first kind of construct, right? And it's really derived from Boyd and really this people first sort of construct, right? And so I think we really, as folks that are delivering mobile to our customers, we have to understand our customers, right? And we have to make sure that we are meeting their needs. So there's almost this sort of, human-centered design, survivor-centered design construct as you look at mobility. If we're not looking at it from that perspective, a lot of times we build things and then we hand it over and we say, hey, have at it. And I hope you enjoy that.
Right.
And we might have completely missed the boat.
Yeah,
right?
what a novel.
What a
novel idea. Let's ask our customers what they actually need.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing actually, we've been looking at our public assistance capabilities, and we have this PA re-engineering effort underway where we've actually been doing listening sessions out across the communities to collect that kind of information, and then building the technologies and the mobile platforms around that.
Excellent. Brian.
Perfect. Right
Brian, what would you throw in there as a lesson learned?
Well, I would even just tack on to even what understand why you're building it, okay? And, too many times with enterprises, we're looking for a return to the organization almost immediately. And assuming that you completely understand what the users need, even at times what the users say they need versus how it translates, what's the right app? You have to move beyond the assumption. People don't build an app just to build an app or enable a transaction. They're doing it to solve a real business need, but as we've talked about, with plenty of people, re-engineering it, and then understanding who you're building it for. Right? You start outside in. Too many times I've seen a desktop app that they try and convert to a mobile app, and it, who's going to fill out their tax return on a mobile app? It's interesting, but not really.
Right.
I've
seen some desktop apps on mobile that they're really ugly when you try to look at them on mobile. They're not done right.
You put it on a laptop doesn't make it mobile.
Right. And I mean, the underlying concept of the construct is different. Keep it simple. They try and get this Swiss Army knife approach. And really what most people are looking for is a single-purpose tool.
Yeah.
Very tight in form and function. And then I'll even tack on to the speed, okay? Because you really have to change your approach and process. I'll even point to Rick because he's heard this from me more than a few times. But, some of the policies, time to value versus, time to market, okay? My time to market is what it takes me to create that product. My time to value has got to be within a digital life cycle. And, in reality, it's 9 months to a year.
Yeah.
Best case with incremental updates along the way. So re-engineering not just the process that you're trying to enable, but all of those supporting processes along the way is fundamentally key.
Yeah. Joe Portale, what do you think? What's a lesson learned that maybe you can add here to the discussion?
I think a key lesson learned that our customers are realizing, and we as well, is that, and you heard this in the CIO Summit a couple weeks ago, is that solutions for the government have got to start looking at a device agnostic approach. Technology is moving too fast. You've heard it across the panel. New Android devices are introduced every 14 days. 14 days, a new Android device comes out. So think about that. So if you're an IT department and you say, okay, I want to go out and buy 5,000 iPads or 5,000 Android devices, in all likelihood, those devices will be obsolete in 1 to 2 years. So what lesson we're seeing learned is that you can't focus on what device you want to use. You have to focus on the services you want to deliver to your customers and the data you want to deliver to your customers. Focus on that. If you focus on what they need to do their job and the services they need to do their job, your technology will fall out of that. And that didn't used to be the case at Lockheed or anywhere else for that matter. But the customers are starting to get that lesson, I think, that let's think about the mission. Let's think about the data that they need to achieve that mission, and then we'll decide on the right technology to support that and do it in such a way that we can be agile and we can change and flip. I used to work with clients, and they'd call us and they'd say, we just bought 5,000 iPads. Now, what do we do with them?
Yeah, right.
And that lesson is, I think, a key lesson.
Yeah,
Customers aren't doing
absolutely.
that anymore. Now
Absolutely.
they're thinking about what they need to do and then thinking about the technology afterwards.
Yep, absolutely. Well said. Adrian?
Yeah, I just got one more point. I mean, I think we're really talking about the soft side of this equation, right? And that's not where we're in familiar territory. In other words, we like the ones and zeros, we like the technology.
Yeah.
But now we have to really go out and talk to people, and really do that on the front end of the conversation versus the back end. So I think this whole notion of how do you build that skill set into sort of the way that we deliver mobile is an extremely important point, where right now we have to operate as service providers in a vastly different way in order to provide the services. Because it's important that, we may think that we understand the requirement, but 9 times out of 10 we've missed it, right? Or we need to tinker on the edges and that tinkering really is important, that then rounds out that service in a way that sort of the delivery is sort of valued by the customer. But I think this whole notion of how do we get to the soft side of the work and really understanding is important.
That is
And
a
not even
really, really good
just
point.
the soft side, but I would even say the cross-functional skills, okay? Because, you take, I'll use his example of a paper-based process, a form. Well, you ask the lawyers sometimes that, what words can we get rid of? Because it's not going to render on a mobile app. And they say, well, we can't take any of them out. Okay. You really have to really brush up on those soft side with the cross-functional. The ones that are successful are starting to break down those silos.
Everything is edge-driven.
Yeah. I want to talk challenges, and I want to jump to the future and hear what you expert panelists see happening down the road here. But first, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rick Walsh from the U.S. Army, Adrian Gardner from FEMA, Rick Holgate from ATF, David O'Barry from Intel Security, Joe Portale from Lockheed Martin, and Bryan Coapstick from HP Enterprise Services. We're talking mobility. We've talked about progress. We talked about success stories, specific programs, lessons learned. Now let's talk about some of the hard things, some of the constraints there yet, or some of the challenges you have that you really want to, get over in order to be where. Let's start with Adrian at FEMA. Adrian, what are some of the things yet that you feel like you still got to go over that hurdle to get where you want to go with these programs?
I think it's one that's already been mentioned, which is security. I mean, this whole notion of security and rebranding security in a way that it is an enabler versus a constraint. is completely sort of one of the major challenges we have. If you can look, you can read any news article in the paper today, you will see it. You'll see either the release of somebody's PII or personal identifiable information, or some particular asset, whether it be public sector or private sector, that's been compromised. So we have to continue to look at security. But even outside of that, I think it's really this whole changing the mindset.
Right.
This is a cultural shift, right? And one that is already happening at within sort of the generation X, Y, and Z folks. So they're coming to the workplace already expecting that mobility is part of the infrastructure architecture, the way any agency sort of works. Sometimes we're not prepared for them to arrive.
Right.
And so when they get into the workplace, we're not equipping them the way that they've actually been trained, or that they actually have gone through the educational process, or that they work day to day. And so I think that whole cultural shift is extremely important, looking at the generations in the workplace.
And I'm so glad you said that, because it keeps our record intact. This is now our 124th radio show. Culture has been a challenge in all 124. People are saying it's not the technology; it's some of these other things around the technology. Rick Walsh, what do you think? And what's a challenge or a constraint out there? Something that you still need to accomplish or get by in order to get where you want to go?
For the Army to really embrace and take advantage of mobile, I think it's critical that we start sharing with our partners. We start sharing with our teammates, and that's FEMA, that's the Air Force, that's the Marine Corps, that's federal government, that's all the organizations. Today, across this table, there are many of these panelists today that I will get in contact with to capture lessons learned to better move my program forward. So on a weekly basis, the Army has and meets with the other DoD organizations in the Commercial Mobile Device Working Group of 8. We talk weekly. But what we have to do is I have to get to a federated environment, a common operating environment where I produce, develop, or certify an app for use. It should be available to ATF, to FEMA, to use that app. We should be able to share that information. Okay. Now, if I go to the point where we include security as that requirement, and I accept a FEMA app, if it's not in my whitelist, if it's not in my secure environment, my MDM, my management construct, will deem my device non-compliant and not allow me to use it. So that federated, shared reciprocity whitelist of apps is something that I have to have.
Excellent.
Something that's critically important for this to move forward in a big way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's going to take everyone working together, and all of us is smarter than any one of us.
Just a quick add. So what Rick is really talking about, thinking about if we had like a FedRAMP-like capability for mobility.
Yeah, good point. That's a very good point.
So that's what he's really talking about, is if we could move to that sort of strategy across the U.S. government, and even to state, local, and tribal and territorial, because we have different constituents. But I don't think that exists today, and so now it's sort of catch as catch can. We have to form relationships on the fly, but it would be wonderful if that kind of effort was taken on.
Excellent.
And not one that takes 900 pages of documentation.
That's right. Rick Holgate, what do you think? What are some of the constraints that you see out there, or some of the things that are still you need to get by in order to get to where you want to go, or you got to work through?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of challenges. One being creating a seamless cross-platform experience on our applications. That's the challenge we need to overcome, and that's more a mindset thing than a technology thing. It's just as we move to a new case management system, as we rethink how we deliver those applications to our users, we need to do it in a context-aware philosophy, so that the application tailors itself to the device on which they're seeing the application, using responsive design. We need to just get better about doing that. And then the other one, based on the recent cyber sprint we've gone through, two-factor authentication is going to become more relevant in the mobile space. So we have to figure out how to use derived credentials, certificate-based credentials, to make it more user-friendly and more usable in the mobile space.
Absolutely. All right, I want to talk about the future, folks. That's where's this all going? We've got about a little over 12 minutes left, and I need for each of you to sort of like put on your future cap and look into your crystal ball and say, what's this all going to mean down the road? Let's work our way down the table here. Start with Joe Portale. Joe, what's it look like for you in the future? What's this going to be like? What will mobility mean to the workforce down the road?
Well, today you hear a lot when people talk about mobile. They talk about delivering information to people wherever they are, whatever they're doing, and whatever they need it. And it's a very common phrase. That's what mobile's about. The future is really doing all that, but delivering information to people that they don't even know exists. And this is what we're trying to focus on at Lockheed Martin by combining analytics and cloud and cyber and social and mobile all together, being able to deliver information to our warfighter, or deliver information to the field inspectors, or deliver information to whoever's in the field, and delivering them information that they may not know exists. Because in the back end, there's an analytics engine running and looking at what their mission is and harvesting that information and being able to push it to them. So if you're a warfighter and there's an image comes in that might benefit their mission, they may not even know that image exists, so they may not know to request it or know to ask for it. But if we know that that image is relevant to their mission, pushing it to them just based on their context, based on their situational awareness. And I think that merging of those technologies in order to deliver context-aware information to users, whether they're an FDA inspector at a plant, or whether they're an EPA inspector in the stream, or whether they're a warfighter in the field, is going to be where the future is. And that's going to be a real, and that convergence is where we see the future going.
Excellent. David O'Berry, what's the future look like to you with all
Yes,
this?
sir. I think it's not just mobility, it's ubiquity. So effectively, what we're talking about, delivering information, but also gathering information from that edge. So I think at the standards enablement of that type of information interchange, because not just information that the warfighter or the edge person might not know they need, but maybe information that the actual center of it doesn't know it has. Right. So I think a lot of times what we see when we expose things from a standards perspective and we don't reinvent the wheel is that there's lots of great information that can be leveraged that we either couldn't get to before or we didn't know existed. Right. And I think that enablement of those types of things in a ubiquitous environment where everybody is pretty much mobile all the time. Right. So you are just part of this organism as a whole. And when you look at from Intel's perspective, they're about end-to-end service level management. Cybersecurity happens to be one thing that we do. Yeah. From Intel Security Group, but Intel's about trying to add a secure minute a day to every digital citizen out there so that they can, live their lives in a better way. And I think that it all becomes part ingrained within that. There's a thread that has to flow, from my 14-year-old who's constantly doing these. This is the next generation of folks that can drag it forward.
Absolutely. Well said. Rick Holgate, what's it look like down the road? Where's this all going? What's it going to mean?
Well, I'd say, we have to look forward 5 years to when the millennials be the predominant share of the workforce. Okay. So we'll be a predominantly millennial workforce in just 5 years. So we have to work quickly to anticipate the workplace of the future, to get away from the notion of a physical workspace, of physically managing and issuing hardware to our users, and instead managing the user experience. And that's a philosophical mind shift we have to undertake in a very short time frame to adapt to a digital native workforce.
Yeah, it's well said. I say all the time, I'm glad I got to the top of management in IT before the kids entered the workforce because they're going to be a lot smarter than I was, as I worked my way up. Bryan, Coapstick, what do you think? What's this look like to you? Where's the future all going?
I would say that, to Rick's point, the 3 to 5 years, I think you're going to see, the fundamental DNA of these organizations fundamentally change. We like to use the term digital DNA. You can choose, it is the intersection or convergence of multiple technologies, but user experience extends well beyond the device and the app, right? It's all of those things working in almost a perfect harmony that delivers that experience. So you're going to see a much more, what I would say, citizen-centric or even employee-centric organization because the speed and delivery of execution. Fundamentally, we're going to have to rethink, redesign our cycles, right? It can't take 12 months, right. 16 months, 18 months. You need to deliver them very fast. Clearly what 18F has done is trying to push the envelope, but we're already seeing that, with the example of the Navy coming out last week. Clearly they went from almost nothing to, full production in about 6 months, and that's not typically how the certifications and accreditations work. So we're already seeing how these people are starting to move the needle. I think you're also going to see greater transparency, okay? You're going to see a much more seamless flow of information, and you're going to start seeing people, align and organize and the culture align around those key processes that really make a difference to the people they serve.
Yeah, well said. Boy, you're right about that certification accreditation process. We heard earlier here how, we've got Google and people like that coming out with new Android devices every 6 months or so, and we're going to do certification and accreditation. We got to change that mindset. Adrian Gardner, what's it look like, Adrian, down the road? Where's this all going?
So really kind of pulling the string on David's point of, every human, I think, at some point with their mobile device becomes a sensor. Yeah. So this whole, the Internet of Things as now where, these mobile devices are enabling us not only to push information to the edge, but also deliver information from the edge. And so I think one of the huge things will be this whole notion of how do we use these mobile platforms to gain more data, more information, to then also drive decision making with or potentially with or without the user's knowledge, which is there's some privacy challenges there, but that's the reality of where we're headed. I think the other piece of it is looking at wearables, right? So that even puts it beyond just this mobile platform. Some folks are wearing the Apple Watch here, and so that you have to realize that when you do that, you're actually becoming a human sensor, and you're actually extending mobility to the edge, and you don't even really realize that now you're going beyond the phone as sort of your point of entry into the network, and now you're actually wearing it on your body pretty much 24/7. So recognizing that this whole notion of the sensor network and how are we extending that and using leveraging that information is going to be extremely important in the future.
Think about it. In San Francisco Stadium, you don't even have to get up to go get a beer, a hot dog, or anything. It is delivered right to you. Leveraging Aruba networks, it's literally, they know where you are, and it fundamentally changes the whole transaction. For uptake, it's a win-win for both the customer and the business or organization that's serving it.
Just one note. My favorite new movie, Minority Report. If you go and check it out, just see where we are today. We're headed down that path.
We need to move from CSI model to precog.
That's right. There you go.
Very good, very good. Yeah, it's fascinating. I was actually seeing some demos you talk about. I mean, people have Fitbits and Apple Watches and all that. I actually saw some demos the other day, and actually for DoD things, the device themselves. Keep track of your not only heart rate but your body functions, send alerts back and everything else. So if someone in the field is distressed and on and on and on. So you're right. It's healthcare is going to bleed into this same subject.
And one becomes an astronaut.
Yeah. One of the actually most exciting things is like these codeathons and things like that are going on that DHS has been a big proponent of, and one we did was for first responders.
Right.
So I would love to see not reinventing the wheel and these apps getting out there. Right. So because that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Rick Walsh, where's this all going? But you've been working these issues for some time now. Where do you see it going down the road in the future?
Well, I see what we've got is we're really going to start looking at what makes up the architecture, what we want to see. And there's really only two things, and Mr. Halverson brought it up in the meeting. He only talked about two topics, and that was data and the user. The rest are enablers. Okay, mobile endpoint devices enabled, the network to transport is enabled, but we're really only talking about having data to the user at the point of execution. He talked about his new POE, so he wants to talk about having that information available for that person to make it there. But he didn't talk about anything else. So think about it as a challenge. When we talk about mobile, we talk about the future of IT and the future decision making. There's only two components that you need to worry about. That's the data and the person that needs the data. So the rest of it are all enablers to satisfy that requirement. Again, we like to talk about in the Army the position or where we're at today. And it used to be, don't talk about desirements, talk about requirements. But the fallacy to that is most of the time what you ask for, what you want today becomes your requirements tomorrow. So don't ignore the guy that wants those desirements, that wants those things that really aren't business requirements because they change. Yeah. Why did he ask for it? Mm-hmm. So take the time as an IT expert, as a mobility expert, to look at what those requirements or what he's asking for in reality. He may want, and a great example to use is buy a new car, okay? Now, when you buy a car, put on one side of the paper the requirements for that car, on the other side of the paper, put down your desirements. XM radio is a desirement. 18-inch wheels are a desirement. 8-cylinder car is a desirement. What you need is 4 wheels, 2 doors, and steering wheel and brakes, okay? So those are your requirements. Everything else are desirements, but they're there for a reason, so don't ignore them when your users ask for desirements. Excellent. Embrace them.
Excellent. Excellent. Well put. Okay. Like I always do, I take notes while we talk here, and I'm going to do my best to try to do a little summary here for you folks. We talked about progress. What I heard was, the movement of the workforce to the field. We need to make progress to make sure we're supporting that. A lot of progress in the telework world. A lot of progress in the downsizing of physical space and moving more workforce into mobile mobile roles. We heard about the recruiting command example that talked about that progress. In some of the specifics, we heard about the Corps engineers working with FEMA and the Blue Roof example, and how it takes collaboration and there's specific programs like that are making big differences. We heard about the FBI and a lot of exciting things going on in mobility over there from Rick. I heard about standardization moving forward and how important standardization is going to be in moving some of these specific things ahead. A lot of talk about the edge in specific programs. We need to think about getting information at the edge. We heard about Coast Guard and some of the marrying up of Coast Guard programs with some of the health information that they're using. When we talk lessons learned, we talked Agile. Agile came out over and over and over again, and you need to be in an adaptive position, especially when it gets to security. You got to be out there proactive in front because it's going to change so fast. I heard a mobile first attitude needs to be adopted. I think Adrian brought that up. Think mobile first. We heard about survivor first attitude. Think about individuals in their needs and focusing on the soft side. Focusing on listening to those customers, what they need. Don't worry about those technology hard requirements. Let's listen to the customer requirements. When we talk challenges, culture jumped right out there like it always does. Security will always be a challenge, and I heard collaboration. There's going to be a need for more collaboration as we move forward. As we go to the future, they'll be delivering information that doesn't exist. We'll be in an end-to-end world. We'll be moving away from the physical workplace, and wearables will become more and more a part of what we do. We will be becoming sensors in this universe that we live in. With that, I want to first thank my panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to be here. Thank our sponsors for sponsoring the program, without which we don't have one. Thanks to the good people here at Federal News Radio for all they do to make this a fun thing to do. And most importantly, thanks to the listening audience out there that tune into the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.